George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The British government goes on a lying spree, a definite breach of the Trade Descriptions Act. Everything they said they wouldn't do, they're doing, and everything they said they'd do, they're not doing. And according to a White House official who works in the same office as President Joe Biden, Joe is dead, or at least, while still alive, he can no longer speak a sentence. Definitely dead is the world's most beloved grandfather. We'll be talking about him in a minute. And the killing goes on in the Levant. Christian churches being desecrated, graves being disturbed, minorities being lynched. But it's all in the interests of freedom, you know. And you are paying for it if you're paying taxes in almost any Western country. It's all coming up tonight on the mother of all talk shows. So fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I'm dedicating this show tonight to the world's most beloved grandfather. Sheikh Khalid Nabhan became famous as he cradled the body of his little granddaughter Reem last year after she was murdered by the invading Israeli forces. With his beautiful smile, his distinctive headgear, he became known as an icon throughout the world. He smoothed her hair, he smoothed her clothes, he cuddled her and talked to her as if she was still there. This week, Israel murdered him too. Having earlier, as it happens, I now learn, having murdered his grandfather in turn. It's been one long family line of being murdered by Israel. For those who say all this began on October the 7th, you're either an idiot or a liar, although, of course, you might be both. The Palestinian people have suffered more than 75 years of all of this. There once was a country called Palestine, then there wasn't. There once were a people called Palestinians who were scattered to the four corners of the earth, stateless, passportless, hated, pillar to post, hunted. It's a very dismal story. And it's the more dismal because my country, and if you're in the United States, afterwards your country, are absolutely centrally responsible for the calvary, for the agony, for the Via Dolorosa that has been 75 years of Palestinian life and death and misery. You don't have to be religious to agree with me, I think, that we should hope that Sheikh Khalid, the grandfather, is reunited with Reem, the granddaughter, in paradise this evening. It was a close run thing, though. I was thinking of dedicating the show to Ireland. I've never been more proud of the Irish blood DNA in my veins than I have been this week. Israel, the most hated country in the world, has decided to pick a fight with Ireland, the most beloved country in the world. I mean that quite sincerely, folks. Is there a people anywhere in the entire world more universally reviled than the state of Israel, the apartheid colonial state of Israel that is presently committing the massacres in the Levant and is up to its neck in the Palestinian blood in Gaza, Jerusalem, and the West Bank, and indeed the wider diaspora. Is there any country? If there is, I'd like to know about it. Call me up and tell me. But my contention is there is no more hated country in the world than Israel. Is there a more beloved country in the world than Ireland? Again, I want to hear from you. Is there? Which country is more beloved than Ireland? And yet, this very week, Ireland closed its embassy in Dublin, as Israel closed its embassy in Dublin and launched the most vicious attack, calling the state itself anti-Semitic, calling the Irish people anti-Semitic, even though plenty of Irish Jews have been on every single protest over the last 15 months against the genocide in Gaza. The Irish people are in the vanguard, it's true, of seeking to change the terms of trade, changing the balance of force. There are other countries, Norway in particular, in a leading role. The Norwegian football team declared this week that they refuse to play Israel in a World Cup qualifying match in protest at the genocide. But Ireland, north and south, with few exceptions, is a country where Palestinian flags fly high. The Glasgow Celtic supporters that you've seen so many images of flying their Palestinian flags, whilst born in Scotland, are self-identifying Irish people like myself, people with Irish mothers like me, people with Irish grandparents. It's the Irish diaspora that's in the front of the Palestinian cause around the Western world. So articles began to appear in the Israeli media openly stating that the Irish hate the Jews, deliberately conflating the Zionist apartheid state of Israel with Jews, the very thing which would get you branded an anti-Semite and arrested if the rest of you tried it here. If any of us decided to blame any Jew in our country for the crimes of Netanyahu, we would rightly be criminalized. We would rightly be prosecuted for it. But when the boot is on the other foot, that's all right. So personally, they're now calling Ireland Paddy-Nestinians. Well, I'm proud at one remove to be a Paddy-Nestinian, and I take my hat off to the Irish President Higgins and to the Irish polity and to the great Irish people. If you've made the worst country in the world hate you more than any other country, you have done a signal service to the world. It's true that Ireland was one of the last countries in the world to recognize the state of Israel. It's true also that was under the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. It's true that the Roman Catholic Church was once not all that keen on Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. And that's partly because 20% of the Palestinian people back in the day were Christians. It's much less now. Most of them have been driven away out of the country. But in those days, the church felt a responsibility to defend the interests of Jesus' people in the Holy Land, after all, whose capital was Jerusalem, where Christ was crucified, one of whose most important little towns, Bethlehem, was the place where Jesus was born. Once upon a time, church leaders cared about that sort of thing. I was thinking about it all over again today when I attended a simply delightful performance by one of my children and her classmates singing Christmas carols and songs to old age pensioners in a local old people's home. Bethlehem, 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 they kept recounting in song after song. And I got to wondering why the hierarchy of the church never explains to anybody that Bethlehem is a Palestinian town that's under siege, under occupation, that blood runs now through the streets of Bethlehem. I wonder why Christian leaders never explain to their flock that Jesus was a Palestinian, that Jesus lived, walked, was tortured, and was killed in the streets of Palestine. Why don't they ever explain it? Because they are running scared of the kind of treatment that Ireland has received this week. But if you don't run, they can't chase you, you know. You have to stand up for what you believe in, or you don't actually believe in it at all. You're only wearing it on your sleeve for ulterior purposes. And it's about time that all these politicians that are never done telling us how Christian they are stood up for the Christians in the Holy Land. And ditto in Lebanon and in Syria, where tonight I can take you to photographs of the Greek Orthodox Church, of Catholic churches, of other Christian places of worship that are being systematically desecrated, wrecked, ruined, and their parishioners hunted down if they have not already escaped across the border to Lebanon. 90,000 Syrians crossed the border into Lebanon over the last couple of days. I'm willing to bet that most, but not all, of those were from Syria's multitude of religious and ethnic minorities. And when you see some of the random video that is now beginning to appear, the news stories that are being published, Christian couple where the husband was beheaded and the wife shot to death, Alawites, the minority sect to which the Assad family belonged, being harassed and beaten at gunpoint and threatened with death. It doesn't look yet that the new ISIS Al-Qaeda government in Syria is necessarily behind this. If they were, the reign of terror would already be very much more bloody. But the truth is, the gates have been blown open and the barbarians have poured in. Uzbeks, Uyghur, Chinese, waiters from Cardiff, people from Albania, from Ukraine, Muslims from Chechnya, people from all over the Takfiri fanatic world, the world where any deviation from a tight current within a sect, within a religion, is punishable by mutilation and death. They have poured in. And the new Al-Qaeda ISIS government has told them all that because they liberated the country, they will be granted citizenship. So they'll have Syrian passports soon. Good luck getting through an airport with a Syrian passport easily anytime soon. Because these black hundreds of extremist fanatics are going to, believe me, be on their travels. They won't stay in Syria for long. Apart from anything else, it's a very poor place. No, these people will be off on their next mission. The Chinese Uyghur battalion, 5,000 strong, has already liberated the missiles and made off with them that they intend to use against China. The Chinese people and government may not wholly be aware of the threat that's coming their way, but they better wise up. Russia will be an obvious target for some of these extremists. The Central Asian republics will be others. Albania, also, very significant number of Albanian fanatics have been fighting and killing in Syria. There are many other countries in the east of Europe with reasons to be less than cheerful about the spilling out of heavily armed, trained, war hardened, battle-hardened fighters from the Syrian jihad. But some of them might come to a Christmas market near you. Some of them might, I don't know, lurk on London Bridge. Some of them might pack their explosives into a backpack and take them to a concert and blow up your children. You better know all of this because your government is responsible for it. The Syrian refugees, I think 1 million of them, maybe 2 million of them, who left because they were political opponents of Assad, who wanted to see the overthrow of the Syrian regime, in a logical world would even now be rushing back home, but of course they are not. I'm going to predict to you that virtually none of these Syrian refugees that are in Western countries are going to return to live under ISIS and Al-Qaeda in poverty-stricken Syria. I'm going to bet you on that. So don't expect that having supported this war, you've supported the ending of the boats. The truth is, more rubber dinghies are headed your way. The people who are now fleeing Syria for fear of ISIS and Al-Qaeda are not going to stay in Lebanon. They're not going to stay in Turkey, which in any case probably is determined to return them to Syria. So they're coming near you. They'll be in a hotel near you soon. A hotelier will pick up £80 a night from your taxes, £80 a night, 7 nights a week for many, many years. So look forward to spending billions of your tax money on new Syrian refugees and continuing to pay whatever it is you are currently paying for the Syrian refugees that are already here. Nothing in life is cost-free, you see. Everything that you do in life has consequences, and every action has a reaction. It won't be long before there is armed opposition in Syria to the HTS, the Al-Qaeda, ISIS government there. How could it be otherwise? The religious and ethnic minorities are not going to allow themselves to be murdered one by one. They're not going to allow their churches to be destroyed one by one. They're not going to wait for the executioner's call. No. Eventually, elements of the army, elements of other armies will begin an armed struggle in Syria, and a new Syrian civil war will inevitably erupt, because the vast majority of Syrians have no intention of being ruled by a Taliban-type formation of extremist fanatics. Somebody criticized me the other day for making a comparison between Syria and Afghan to the detriment of the latter. Well, you don't know any Syrians if you don't know what I'm talking about. There are no Christian minorities in Afghanistan. Women don't sit in cafes drinking red wine with their husbands in Afghanistan. There is no freedom for women or for any dissenter in cultural, social, or political terms in Afghanistan. There are no communists in Afghanistan. The last time I looked, there were 11 communist MPs in the Syrian parliament, which presumably has now been dissolved. The comparison between Syria and Afghanistan is religious, apart from anything else. The type of Islam practiced in Syria is not the type of Islam practiced in Afghanistan. If you can't see this, you are a liberal idiot. If you think pointing that out is racism, you are a liberal idiot, bereft of any understanding of what the word racism means. Anyway, accusing me of racism is a very, very difficult thing to do. Being the father of 5 mixed-race children, being the husband of an Indonesian woman, and having represented more people of color and of different cultures in the British Parliament over nearly 40 years than anybody in the history of the state. Calling me a racist is really not going to stick. Yes, I mean you, Mr. Bastani. The truth is, the story isn't over in Syria. The struggle will continue. But there's nothing to celebrate. Whatever you thought of the regime of Bashar al-Assad, there's nothing to celebrate. Israel now occupies 1/3 of the country. 1/3! Israel occupies 1/3 of Syrian land. The US and Turkey occupy the other 1/3 of Syrian land. And the Turks are massacring the Kurds. Although the Kurds, as you could expect, are putting up quite a fight and refusing to go quietly into that good night. That only leaves 1/3 of Syria. And boy, is that going to be fought over. I've only got time to make passing reference, though it will come up, of course, in the show, to the act of terrorism that took place in Moscow this week when General Kirillov was blown up along with his adjutant as he came out of an apartment block in which he lived to get into his ministerial car at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's the time they start work in Moscow. He was cruelly murdered, yes, of course, but he was a general in the army and he had been publicly threatened. It probably didn't come as all that much of a surprise. And there are very big questions to be asked about why a general is living in an apartment block in the middle of a war. There are questions to be asked about why a general is being picked up by a single driver instead of a whole posse of FSB agents securing the perimeter to allow him to come out into his car. It is another major security fuck-up by the Russians. Of these things, there is absolutely no doubt. But it also puts very serious pressure on President Vladimir Putin. If there was an end-of-year award for forbearance, for perseverance, and for biding one's time, Putin would definitely win it. But there's a rising, huge rising demand in Russia for this war in Ukraine to be finished. And that will require taking the gloves off. The last time I looked, Vladimir Putin had begun taking his gloves off. Much more of this coming up. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a Holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Now, you get that film. In fact, you get my films, and you get to talk to me in the chat on a Monday, as many of my friends did on Monday and Tuesday, in fact, of this week. You get all kinds of content which is exclusive to the Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. It is the most effective way that you can support this show. And if you don't support this show, eventually, at least the midweek show will have to go out of business. So if you care about the mother of all talk shows, last week I told you that more than 5 million people had watched all or part of the show. I misunderestimated. By the end of last week, in fact, by Monday of this week, that number had crossed 6 million views. 6 million views of all or part of the previous week's mother of all talk shows. 2 shows. If you want that to continue, you'll have to support it. It costs you the price of a cup of tea per week, and a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe at that. So if you think we're worth it, please, at the end of this show, become a patron. Patreon.com/George Galloway. We've got a poll, as always. Will Trump end the Ukraine war? Yes or no? 22,861 of you have already voted. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. You should follow me on Telegram. It may turn out to be the last redoubt. You should follow me on Twitter, on my X, if you have not already done so. More than 750,000 people do. You can vote on the YouTube community poll or on the YouTube stream. Will Trump end the Ukraine war? Yes or no? If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Kevork Almassian is a Syrian in exile. He's also the best geopolitical analyst and the host of Syriana Analysis. You won't find a more authentic Syrian than him, and you won't find better analysis, and we're lucky that he joins us now. Kevork, my condolences, if I have not yet paid them to you, for what has happened to your people and your country. The news just breaking is that Donald Trump is refusing to lift the $10 million bounty offered by the American state for the capture of the man who's now running Syria. Now, this poses a question because the also anti-terrorist British government sent its Foreign Office officials to go and break bread with that man. So we have a situation where the British are meeting Golani in Damascus, whilst the incoming president of the United States is offering $10 million for his arrest. Explain if you can.
George, what shall I explain seriously? And I'm sure you remember at the early stages of the war when we proved with evidence that the Defense Intelligence Agency of the US sent an investigation to Barack Obama, clearly stating that the driving force behind the insurgency against Assad were clearly these Salafi jihadists and Al-Qaeda elements and the Muslim Brotherhood elements in the country. And we were called Assadists, conspiracy theorists, and freedom haters, and all these labels, right? Now, fast forward today, in 2024, who rules Syria? It's the rebranded Al-Nusra Front, the offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria. So our fears came true. However, this is irrelevant in the discussion, in nowadays discussion, because the damage has already been done. And nowadays we see a flow of, let's say, Western diplomats, like Damascus is now the new Mecca, and they're flying to Damascus and meeting with Golani. Not only the British diplomats, but also the German diplomats. The special envoy of Germany to Syria celebrated last year the death of a Syrian activist who joined ISIS on his official Twitter account. So therefore, all these developments nowadays that we see in Syria, it's not surprising for me at all, but it reveals their masks. It exposes that these diplomats, these governments, they are in the same bed of HTS and Golani, and they don't mind Golani leading this so-called transitional period in Syria. But I don't want to make bold now predictions, because last time I made a prediction on your show and I said that I think that Assad will stay in Damascus and he could end up killed like Gaddafi, but I didn't anticipate that he would flee the country, and that was very shameful for him. However, I think that Golani still has some duties and tasks to execute on the ground, and after that he will become a burden. He will become a burden because once the HTS infiltrates the state institutions, they change the curriculum, and they get a strong grip over the education system and the press and journalism and everything, then they will try to Islamize the country. And I think here some of the regional countries are not going to be happy about it, and especially some of the Arabic countries. So there will be mounting pressure on the Trump administration by the allies of Trump, basically in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, to get rid of Golani. And Trump then, I suspect that he would get rid of Golani, but getting rid of personalities doesn't change the outcome, because Golani could go and another figure will come in his place. Like the Baghdadi has gone, like the Bin Laden has gone, and new personalities will pop up. Now the situation on the ground is that all these factions that were supported by the foreign intelligence, like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the US, Israel, etc., they have military power to impose their will on the people, and they are the victors. So the people are submitting to the de facto rule of HTS. So some of the people that I know in Syria now, they raise the revolution flag because they're afraid of HTS. And we can see that there are revengeful acts against especially the minorities in Homs and in Latakia. And they can accuse anyone of anything. They say you're a collaborator. And George, I want to make clear, I myself was accused by Jaish al-Islam, Islam's army, in an official statement of being a collaborator with the Assad regime. I was called a spy by Islam's army, Jaish al-Islam. So if I was in Syria now, like the German government wanted me to do, because they wanted to deport me back to Syria a few years ago, if I was now in Syria, what could have been my destiny? I would have been killed, right, by these so-called moderate rebels who are now in charge of Damascus. So what the Western governments have done to Syria, in my opinion, it's criminal, because it's going to change the discourse of history, the Syrian history and the Syrian civilization, because Syria had a long history with civilization, 7,000-year-old, but the people now in charge of the country, they don't value. And we have seen how they destroyed Ma'lula, how they destroyed Palmyra, how they destroyed Aleppo, and so many other ancient cities. So I'm very fearful, but I come from a position of someone who cares about the country. But these people, they don't consider me even a Syrian, because 100 years ago, my grandparents arrived to Syria as refugees. So they call me now an Armenian refugee and asking me to go back to Armenia and not to speak about the Syrian case.
Now, it's fair to say, I think we should struggle for accuracy, that so far the Holocaust of revenge and beheadings and mass murder that we feared have not happened. There have been desecration of churches. I drew attention to them. There has been at least one beheading, maybe two. There have been random executions. There are a lot of threats, and the land is being roamed by, to a very significant extent, foreign fighters who are pointing guns at people and demanding loyalty, oaths of loyalty to their particular religious faction and so on. But there has not been the kind of scenes that we became familiar with during earlier stages of the Syria war. Is that because Golani is exercising restraint, in which case might that restraint change? Or is it like that leopard in the zoo in Kathmandu that actually changed its spots?
George, only a few years ago, I'm sure you already know this, these groups have committed genocide against ethnic minorities, especially in northern Latakia, in Homs, and in the suburbs of Damascus. And we have documentable facts how they ethnically cleansed and committed violence against ethnic groups and religious groups based on their religious beliefs. However, this time it's different for HTS. This time they have come as conquerors. They have taken control of the entire country. And 80% of the Christians have already been ethnically cleansed from the country. And the Alawites are in a very, very, let's say, weak situation now that Assad fled the country. And there are clear instructions to HTS, Golani, and the other factions fighting alongside him that there is a hyper focus now on Syria, and all the international press is in Syria. And they don't want to create any backlash or bad image about HTS at the current moment, that all this mainstream media is trying to polish and rebrand HTS, right? So they don't have to do these heinous acts any longer. They are in charge, they're in control, they have the Jacobian force, and they're going to control everything the people see and watch and learn, also including the religious affairs, for example, in the mosques. So they have the soft power and they have the hard power in the country, and they can subjugate the rest of the population. Now, on the long run, when they start imposing, let's say, Taliban-like or Afghanistan-like ruling system on the people, especially trying to persecute women or against some religious minorities, then the people will start feeling like they no longer belong to Syria. So they will migrate. And here comes the role of the so-called progressive liberal NGOs. They say, you come to Lebanon, we give you, like you can apply for resettlement policy, and there are many countries who would receive you. And the numbers of the minorities in Syria have become very little anyways. And this has happened during the war. During the peak of the war, there were NGOs in Lebanon. You apply for the resettlement. You have to prove that you're a Christian from Syria. And in a matter of a few months, you fly to Canada, you fly to Australia, you fly to the United States. So this is how they already emptied the Christians and the minorities from Syria. So now the HTS is in charge. They don't have to do such heinous acts any longer, and especially with the presence of the international public. So this is a tactical approach now, but on the long run, they will have a strong grip, and Syria will definitely become one way or another Islamic rule. I'm not saying it will become a caliphate, and I'm not against Islam, but we have to be honest with the people. When you say you are waging an insurgency to bring democracy, human rights, and women's rights, and all these so-called Western values to Syria, and then Western intelligence agencies collude with these groups on the ground and arm them with the so-called intention of bringing democracy and human rights to Syria, then they were manipulating the people, right? Because this is not the outcome of this insurgency. The outcome of the insurgency is the founder of Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria is the de facto ruler of Syria now.
Now, of course, what Syria is now, geographically, topographically, is a moot point, isn't it? Because two foreign countries control gigantic swathes of it. Are they going to disgorge them, or is Israel in Syria for good? Is Turkey in Syria for good?
I think they will divide Syria into spheres of influence, zones of influence. Turkey will have the upper hand over the north, including Aleppo, Idlib, and Homs. Saudi Arabia will have an upper hand over Damascus, and Israel will try to open corridors with Asweda and in Daraa. They're already in Daraa now. They're only 20 kilometers away from Damascus now. And they want to try to open a geographical corridor to Asweda in order to, first they pose a security threat against the Druze, like it happened in the past when ISIS and Al-Qaeda, her hordes attacked Asweda. And when existential threat is materialized against the, let's say, Druze in Asweda, Israel will present itself as a savior. So they will open a corridor with the Golan Heights. And I suspect they are also trying to open a corridor with the Kurds in the east. But this is going to be a recipe for more conflicts, because Turkey now will not tolerate an independent Kurdish enclave. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to first create spheres of influence with the hope of dividing Syria or balkanizing Syria at a later stage. This is the project of the imperialists. Will they succeed or not? This is a different story. But this is a recipe for more war, because now if Turkey intervenes on the side to crush, let's say, the Kurdish political entity, then this will create also other conflicts in the region between the Kurds and Turks, and also in the north of Iraq, the Kurdistan, again, inside Turkish territories. So if Turkey is seriously thinking of creating a stable Syria, I think they should restrain themselves from going against the Kurds, but also at the same time, because we know that the Kurdish project is also a necessity for the Greater Israel project, because the borders of the Greater Israel project starts from the Nile in Egypt, and it ends on the western shore of the Euphrates. And who controls the eastern bank of the Euphrates, according to the Zionist theorists? It is the independent Kurdistan state. So this is what they're aspiring in Syria. But will they succeed or not? I think this is now in the hands of the Syrian people. I heard your video, and I heard you were crying deep inside when you were speaking about the Palestinian people as well, and how disappointed you were. And I would like to reiterate that what happened in Syria is going to definitely harm Palestine big time. And the Palestinians who are cheering for it, I don't think they understand the implications of losing Syria on their side. And this is going to have to help Israel to create or to pursue its dream for a greater Israel. So the Syrian people, unfortunately, at the current moment, they don't have anyone to protect them from this project. So I'm also disappointed. And at the same time, however, I feel like I'm liberated from this wish and will deep inside that I was trying to educate the people and warn them from this outcome. Now I feel like if the people do not listen and do not want to hear, and this is the end result of it, maybe we should leave the people experience it and pass through it and learn and mature and then pursue their liberation again, because it seems that they're not ready yet for such a let's say, liberation movement in the region against American imperialism.
Kevork Almassian, a very somber ending to your contribution indeed. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on the mother of all talk shows. We'll continue to monitor events in Syria, of course, as the days go on. Will Trump end the Ukraine war? Yes or no? Get voting. We want that vote up quite considerably. We need at least 25,000 votes for it to be meaningful. But at the moment, it is a close-run thing. Will Trump end the Ukraine war? Yes or no? It's getting towards 50-50. Right after this short break, let's go to Canada to hear from Jennifer. But I'll be right back.
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Trump end the Ukraine war? Yes or no? Get voting. It's a close run thing. Let's go to Canada, where Jennifer wants to have her say. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. I am actually in the United States. I'm not in Canada. I'm actually in Oregon. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I come from the Midwest, Bible Belt of America. I've had veterans, every generation of males in my family served in every war. My grandfather did 2 tours in Vietnam. He actually was stationed in England for a while and met my grandmother. My grandmother is actually from Ipswich. Kind of have a long history, full circle, if you will. And I married a Middle Easterner. My husband is actually, his family is from the Christian Valley of Syria. So in going full circle, my grandfather actually died and confirmed Agent Orange exposure during the Vietnam War. And then my understanding now of what Israel was doing in 1967, it really starts to feel a strong resemblance to Vietnam and Ukraine being a distraction war, as all of these other things are going on. So I really just wanted to call in and just tell you how much we appreciate, holding faith in the situation. I actually concur with Kevork earlier saying you get to the point that you start to realize that each individual is just going to have to go through some of these experiences to come out stronger on the other side. We are mobilizing. Veterans are coming together, speaking out against the war machine. I experience my own amount of abuse coming, these soldiers. We really are going to have to start putting some things in place where we are demanding, especially as females, especially as women, our sons, our daughters going off to these endless wars for billionaires. The Greater Israel Project is actually running parallel in America. The walls going up at lightning speed, drones are flying all over the place. The demolition project in the Middle East is basically occurring from all angles at this point. At one point in Syria,
it is.
It's like a demolition project is occurring from all angles. They've taken over so much control in the region. And really, why do you need Israel when you now have taken control over the land and prime real estate in the Mediterranean for luxury condos? They've cinched up all the oil. One thing that I would like to point out, and I never hear it discussed enough, in my opinion, 9/11/2001 was President Assad's birthday, and we have not passed an audit at the Pentagon since, and American taxpayers are missing trillions of dollars. We have homeless veterans out on the streets, and we're just not going to take this anymore. Everybody in the world,
Well,
I always say
I hope not. What a call! Thanks, Jennifer. You definitely crossed a lot of T's and dotted a lot of I's there. 9/11 hasn't gone away, The secrets and lies about 9/11 will one day be out. It may be years, it may be decades, or maybe it will be when Donald Trump takes power on January the 20th. Maybe it will be when RFK Jr. gets around the cabinet table. We don't know when the truths will emerge, but I think we can safely say from history that the truth will out. Jennifer, my salute to you and your family and your determination to carry on the fight. We're not defeated as long as we refuse to accept defeat and declare our intention to continue the struggle. Now, if you're on YouTube, you can scan the QR code and leave a comment on the YouTube stream, and I'll read them out if they're good enough. Ben Johnson says, most of Trump's cabinet choices say Palestine never existed, and there is no such thing as a Palestinian. I am proudly a McPaddy-Stinian. It's hard to say that. McPaddy-Stinian. Yes, we're all McPaddy-Stinians now. Jerry Mackay says, I'm a proud Palestinian. I have actually supported the cause of Palestine since I was 13 years old. I am now 71 years old. That's a lot of love for Palestine. I'm also a proud Irish Republican, says Jerry. Beautiful. Paul Champagne says, there's nothing complex about the situation in Syria. There are Israeli and American terrorists there, along with all their ponies and lapdogs. Erdogan wants to be loved and needs a refugee camp. And Syndicate says, ironic that non-Syrian terrorists are telling someone else to go back where they came from. And Z.A. Lugazade says, Greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates is the pipe dream. Israel only has 7 million Jews, not enough to populate the land. But then you don't need to populate the land in order to rule it. The British ruled all of India with 60,000 British officials. Shaheen is in California, again, on Syria. Go ahead, Shaheen.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Shaheen.
Hi, George. I'm very honored to be on your show and talk to you under these terrible circumstances. I wanted to talk about something I heard from a Laith Marouf, someone I listened to. Do you know of him?
No.
He does Free Palestine TV, and he does a show regularly with Garland Nixon. And he had an office in Damascus. Yes, and his office got raided in Damascus. He lost all of his equipment, but he does have a lot of knowledge. And he said something that made me want to ask if you can look into this. He said that before Aleppo fell, the Assad family was invited to Moscow. Apparently he has a son there who's studying, and much similar to what happened to the Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri, who went to Saudi Arabia and then never left. He actually never left Moscow, according to Laith Marouf, of course. You can ask Nixon Garland this, or you can get him on your show. He said he was held, and basically Syria was left without a leader, plus all of their communications are ran by Russian communications and their equipment. And they were given all sorts of weird commands. And like to say, like, oh, everyone was paid like $20 or something like that. His elite forces were not paid. They were paid properly, what I'm trying to say. It didn't because a lot of us are sensing some treachery involved. I'm just like, I just
there's absolutely some treachery involved, but no evidence of who the traitors were yet. But it will, of course, emerge. Of course, all kinds of rumors will fill the vacuum, and you've just put one of them into circulation. The idea that the Russians kidnapped Bashar al-Assad and held him in Moscow strikes me as extremely far-fetched. The Russian relationship with the Assad regime and the Syrian state is well over 50 years in the making, and I very much doubt that that's how it ended. Bashar al-Assad himself spoke this week in a statement that is confirmed to have been his. Kevork Almassian said so, and I'm taking his word for that, and I believe that. Now, of course, if you take political asylum in a country, especially if you're a high-profile political figure, you don't have complete political freedom, of course. You will not be allowed to sit in Moscow and cause problems for Russia in the Middle East. That's obvious, it's normal, and I'm sure that that's the case with Bashar al-Assad. I was very surprised that he left the country. I'm very surprised that he left the country without recording a final address to the people who'd fought for him, and to the people who are now being lynched for their support for him. Maybe, as he seemed to indicate in his statement, that was a practical impossibility. The Russian base that he was on in Syria, he says, was already under drone attack. And the Russians said that in order to get him out safely, they had to get him out then, there, and now. I think it's only of academic interest now, as Kevork seemed to indicate. The die is cast. It's too late now. There will be no return for the Assad family. There will be no return for the Ba'ath Party. There would appear to be no prospect of a revival of Arab nationalist power, either in Iraq or in Syria, and these were the only two places where they had at one time state power. The Arab world has moved into a new era, and that era can be summed up in the dichotomy I tried to draw last Sunday and last Wednesday. There are slave states that are mere satraps of the United States empire, which allows them to rule and rob their people as long as they remain loyal to the empire and kick back a substantial portion of their wealth. And they have a comprador in their own countries, a collaborating class of people, academics, journalists, and so on, who suck at the teat of the puppet who is allowed by the empire to call himself a king, call himself an emir, or whatever. And insofar as there is opposition now to these slave states, that's coming from Islamism. That Islamism may have reached its high water mark in Syria. We'll see. If the king of Jordan were to be overthrown by them, if the dictator Sisi were to be overthrown by them, then that would indicate that they had the ball at their feet and had power. But I must tell you, I don't expect either of those two things to happen. I think they will concentrate on ruling Syria, turning it into a kind of Afghan state. They will not provoke any conflict with Israel. They're making that clear. They will not tolerate any Palestinian resistance activity on Syrian soil. They've made that clear. Their power, military force, such as it is, will be visited on their own people, on their minorities, and on any dissenting voices. So I'm afraid the Syria that we knew is gone, and almost certainly gone for the rest of your lifetime and mine, Shaheen. Maybe things will change in the lifetimes of our children. Being the father of 2 Syrian sons, I certainly hope so. Now, on the MOATS podcast this week, in addition to what I told you last week, we're in the top 10 in Singapore, Egypt, Turkey, Slovenia, and Bulgaria. I'm amazed at the number of Bulgarians who know me. I'm stopped at airports and different places by people who want selfies, and when I ask them where they're from, they say Bulgaria. The spirit of Georgy Dimitrov is not dead. We have had a huge influx of US listeners to the podcast, up 60% this year. And when Gayatri and I go on our speaking tour of the United States next year, God willing. I expect those numbers will grow. So you can scan the QR code on the screen now and you can download the MOATS podcast. Let's go to Michigan, which is where our tour will probably kick off. Talid is in Michigan on Syria. Go ahead, Talid.
Good evening, George, and I'm honored to be on your show. I've been trying to be on your show for the past at least week, and I tried before, so thank you for taking my call. I wanted to talk about so many things, but I don't wanna speculate about what happened in Syria. I think everyone was following the sanction, the key player maybe expecting something like this to happen. But I want to focus on 4 key points. I would say leave the Syrians, enjoy the moment to celebrate what they think. Let me just repeat, what they think is a victory for them. I know very soon they will wake up and they will see the reality. I think we all see this blueprint in Iraq, how people start their celebration and how the Western media were well prepared to expose the regime as is the evilest regime on the planet, with all the made-up story like what we are hearing about Syria today, even though I never look at the Syrian regime as a good regime from human rights point of view, but that's my own view. But I was saddened and disappointed the way it ended and to who they ended. So for the Syrian, I would say give them space, let them enjoy the moment, even though I am very, very sure that what awaiting them is worse than what happened to the Iraqi. Now, a lot of your caller and your host also touched on a Palestinian, and I'm a Palestinian, so I would like to comment about some of the Palestinians are celebrating too the fall of the Assad regime, and they're thinking that is going to benefit them, which I'm sure it is not. I think our struggle is again put in another dark tunnel, God knows for how long, but this is taking us back to the late 80s when the Palestinians were basically scattered across the world, and the Arab world in particular, with no place where they can operate, and only the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza were struggling, and when the first Intifada started. But I don't think this will be the end for the Palestinian struggle. I think it got harder on them, especially with what happened in the past year. But let me touch on the last 2 points. I don't think this is benefiting Israeli for the long term. I know the immediate gain, it's obvious. Israeli expanded their occupation to the Golan Heights, to the other area, and I heard today that they complete their occupation to Al-Qunaytara County, and they could extend it more. But I don't think, knowing the Syrian population and the diversity, having that being unrest, and I am sure the West and Israel, they plan for the unrest to be the replacement for the Assad regime. I don't think any wise person think that they are bringing a Singapore blueprint to implement in Syria. I think it's very obvious. They are there for the destruction, they are there for the unrest, and they are there for forcing a lot of those minorities either to fight, which will be a bloody civil war, or they will flee the country. But I think in the long run, Israel from the Golan Heights was, we can say, at peace for 40 years or more. I don't think the situation will continue, no matter what they will do, no matter what will happen today. They will not be able to 100%, in my humble opinion, to control the population to the point they will all be aligned to a central group or government. I think it's part of the past. And I think that what the Israeli and the West celebrating today as achievement, it is strategic. Syria as a state is no longer there, and I don't think it will be there ever, again, my humble opinion. But I think that will create another Lebanon in Syria, where you will have Christian with their leaders, Sunnis, Muslim with their leaders, Shia with their leaders, and other minority. And we all know how Lebanese front is and what happened in the past 13, 14 months. So,
well, I was just about to say that, Khaled. If it becomes like Lebanon, it'll have to pass through several extremely bloody civil wars before there is any kind of equilibrium. If we're going to balkanize Syria as Lebanon has been balkanized on a confessional basis. If there's ever a Syrian state again, where the president has to be this and the prime minister has to be that, the speaker of the parliament has to be that, as exists in Lebanon. That settlement only came about after rivers of blood flowed for decades in Lebanon. But one way or another, it doesn't sound like good news. I agree with your central point that, of course, the Palestinian struggle will continue, but it will have to eventually be a different kind of struggle. The only basis of armed struggle in occupied Palestine was if those countries who wished it well were able to transmit weapons and money and ammunition and military technology to the Palestinians. And that no longer exists, and that will no longer exist, according to Golani himself. So unless some other means, and given Israel's military power, it's very hard to see what that other means could be, then no more weapons will arrive in occupied Palestine very soon. There'll be some in the pipeline, there'll be some in the tunnels and so on, but eventually the bullets will run out long before the courage of the resistance will run out. And then there will still be millions of Palestinians living in an apartheid colonial state, but they will have no means of rising up against it. So they'll have to come up with different ways. For us living in the West, like you and me, nothing changes for us. We have to unrelentingly struggle for awareness and for boycott, for divestment, for sanctions, for ostracism. And we have made big progress in that. The fact that the Norway team will not play Israel, the fact that the Israelis have withdrawn their embassy from Ireland and unleashed a barrage of hate speech against the most popular people in the world, the Irish people. These are all indications that Israel's soft power in the world is very much reduced, but the hard power on the ground is very much increased. And we'll have to see where all of that leads. I'm well past the break time, but coming up right after it is the one and only Katie Halper, writer, host of the Katie Halper Show, and co-host of Useful Idiots. She is worth watching, I promise you. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, that Donald will be in soon. I understand he likes that that impersonation of him, and I do too. Thanks very much, Mr. McLeod, for that. Katie Halper is writer, host of the Katie Halper Show, co-host of Useful Idiots, which is, to say the least, a tantalizing name, and I'm very glad that she joins us now. Katie, let's start with Donald Trump, if we may. The rhinos in the Congress are defying the Trumpers. I saw Bannon demanding that Mike Johnson must go as the Speaker. It's an annual Christmas tradition to bust the budget of the United States and give large amounts of money away to foreign allies like Ukraine and like Israel. Give us a flavor of how things feel in the US with what, just hardly 4 weeks to go until Donald Trump is back.
Well, I think that Donald Trump is very good at selling an image of being iconoclastic, being someone who breaks with tradition, breaks from status quo. He certainly does that in affect and in rhetoric, but unfortunately, he is not as rebellious and outside of the system as he likes to pretend that he is. And so what we see is he promises that he's going to be anti-war. He promises he's going to go after, the deep state. And of course, that doesn't really happen. He doesn't drain the swamp. We see him work with a lot of warmongers. And so that's what I expect. I think that, Joe Biden was awful in terms of foreign policy. I think Trump will be awful in terms of foreign policy. I don't think that there will be much of a difference. I mean, my only hope is that somehow Netanyahu does something that slights Trump. Trump is so such a snowflake and thin-skinned narcissist that he could actually perhaps be moved politically by some kind of interpersonal fight in a way that I think Biden can't be, because Biden is a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist, as he likes to remind us all the time.
Now, it was revealed undercover, under the table filming of an important official from the White House who revealed, to use his words, he said, Joe Biden is dead. Then he clarified it to say he actually can no longer speak a sentence. In which case, who's calling all these shots in Washington right at this moment? Because there's one hell of a lot of shots being fired.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably been brain dead for a long time. And I think this actually speaks to something I was just kind of alluding to with Trump, which is that, these things are so systemic, the way that power works and the way that foreign policy works in the United States, that, presidents in the United States are almost like figureheads. I mean, they do wield a lot of power in some ways, but they're all beholden to the same kind of ultimately neoconservative agenda, whether they're Democrats or they're Republicans. I think what you have with both actually parties is you have a combination of neoconservatism and neoliberalism. You kind of have domestic neoliberalism, and then you have neoconservatism in terms of foreign policy. And sadly, there's not a real significant difference. Bernie Sanders has been very disappointing on many issues, but he still is far and away, I would say, the best that we have in terms of someone who had a remote shot at the presidency. And of course, I've said this from the beginning, it was more likely that he would win the general than he would the primary. I mean, his big enemies included the DNC. And I think we're seeing, with the killing of the healthcare CEO, Luigi Mangioni's killing, the alleged killer, Luigi Mangioni, we're seeing how bipartisan the issue of healthcare is. And it's just making it clearer than ever that the Democrats were all too happy to block and thwart someone who actually could have been a leader who united the left and right. Because again, this issue of healthcare is something that really does go across the board politically. And so it's just a shame that we're left with these, two parties run by war criminals.
Speaking of the DNC and the Democratic Party, I saw surely a spoof on social media just before the show that there was some discussion about a Harris-Hillary ticket 4 years from now. Apart from the fact Hillary will probably be over the hill 4 years from now, is Harris seriously going to try and stay in frontline politics in your view?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I mean, Hillary really is kind of like the nightmare that will never go away. I'm hoping that Kamala doesn't take a page from her book. I mean, Kamala Harris is actually kind of more just of like an empty shell, like a husk of a person. Hillary is vile and odious, but she is her own person in some ways. Now that you're asking me to compare those two, but both are awful.
Well, we'll keep a close eye on it. But they will have to. Some presidential hopeful will have to emerge. This is Trump's only term, his final term. So they'll be up against someone quite new next time, whether Vance or someone else. Now's the time to get a candidate in the field early for the Democrats, isn't it?
Yeah, I have no idea who that person would be. I mean, I like Rashida Tlaib, but of course the DNC would never let her come to the fore because she has committed the crime of making it clear. Well, she's committed two crimes. One is she was born Palestinian, which obviously Democrats won't tolerate. And she also has made the mistake of making it clear that she sees Palestinians as human beings. And that's also unacceptable for the Democratic Party.
Now, we'll come to
Sorry
Palestine
if you can hear my dog in the background. My dog is very angry about politics as well.
I'm familiar with your dog. I think he doesn't like me. He barks every time you're on my show.
No, he's encouraging. He's in agreement with you. He's going like this. Yeah.
Oh, really?
With his paw.
Okay. Yeah. Now, let's go to Ukraine for a bit. The resort to terrorist outrage against a senior general in the Russian army is the kind of thing that started World War I. The Russians have shown great restraint and forbearance at previous terrorist attacks. Are they likely, do you think, to hold the United States and NATO responsible for this crime? What do you think Russia will do in response to this egregious act in Moscow yesterday?
I'm not sure what Russia will do. I guess the thing that scares me is how happy United States politicians and Western politicians are to saber rattle. I mean, that's what is really scary to me. And you have people, this has been going on for a while, where you have the same people who are saying that Putin is this irrational monster, like a new Hitler. The same people who are saying that also remember Donald Trump to be harder on him. And if he's this irrational guy with a nuclear weapon, don't you want diplomacy? I guess to be fair to their various distortions. I mean, I think that comparing Putin to Hitler is actually kind of almost a form of Holocaust denialism. I mean, I think it's just such an inappropriate comparison and a dangerous one, because the takeaway from that, of course, is that no negotiation, no diplomacy, let's bring on World War III. I think that is very scary. And I think that every time someone makes that comparison between Hitler and Putin, they're doing something very reckless and very dangerous and honestly bringing us closer to war. But I think that, both parties have become so there was just an interview with Mitt Romney that Jake Tapper at CNN did, and he was kind of like groveling and fawning over Mitt Romney. And, Aaron Mate and I just discussed this on Useful Idiots, the fact that, the Democrats used to make fun of Mitt Romney, right? Like Obama actually once said to him, the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. And it seems like the Democrats have now, picked up that phone call, if you will, and given the 1980s their foreign policy back when it comes to Russia and the Cold War. And, one of the things that was so scary was watching how liberals were so upset about Russiagate, which was a big nothing burger, and they really wasted their opposition to Trump because, of course, the issue with Russiagate is that nobody who didn't already hate Trump cared about Russiagate. It was not only, I think, a stupid thing to talk about in terms of content, but just politically and strategically, it was really stupid.
Now, you were and are one of the terrifically brave Jewish Americans who have been out there on the front line in defense of Palestinian rights for many years. We're looking now at a new Middle East. Netanyahu disappeared today, and then he turned up actually inside Syria for a photo call. A photo call for the ages, to be sure, for Netanyahu to be able to do that. Well, it was worth the trip and worth the secrecy, I have no doubt, to him. In other words, what I'm saying is, militarily, on the ground, Israel has scarcely ever now been more powerful. It has a seemingly unbreakable alliance with the United States, and neither Russia nor China are prepared to contest that seriously in the Middle East. We can, I think, infer that for the foreseeable future at least. On the other hand, as I was just saying, Israel's soft power in the world has never been at a lower ebb. You were in Ireland over the summer. You'll know exactly how much the Irish hate the Jews, i.e. not even remotely. But right. You'll also know how strong the Irish feel about Palestine. What do you make of this apparent dichotomy between Israel's hard power going up and its soft power going down?
Yeah, it's interesting. You just obviously sarcastically said that Ireland hates Jews, and I'm sure someone's going to clip that and pretend that you were being sincere in that. But I think, Jews like me are often called self-loathing Jews or anti-Semites. We get that all the time. Or if we're not anti-Semites, we're perpetuating or contributing to anti-Semitism. And the irony is, Israel is live streaming a genocide that everyone can see on their phones. And they are misleadingly and dishonestly and criminally saying that they're acting on behalf of Jews and they're acting in the name of Jews. Now, what on earth would create more anti-Semitism than doing that? Now, of course, I want to be clear. There are anti-Semites who have anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that have nothing to do with Israel. They call Jews, like Bolsheviks, communists. Thank you very much, by the way. But, this clearly is not something that makes Jews safer. And Israel loves to pretend that they were founded to make Jews safe. They exist to make Jews safe. And you can't say that the two things at the same time. You can't say that this was the biggest attack. October 7th was the biggest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, which is, by the way, an extremely irresponsible thing to say that really belittles anti-Semitism and Nazism, because as we know, what was done on October 7th was not done because the people occupying Palestine and turning Gaza into an open-air concentration camp are Jewish. The attack was because of the occupation. And these, if the people who were the government of Israel were, Greek Orthodox, they would be attacking those people. It has nothing to do with the culture or religion of the occupiers. And I actually want to mention something, George, that I think you'll be interested in, which is that I'm working on a documentary right now, and it follows around Jewish Holocaust survivors all across the world who are speaking out against what Israel is doing. They're speaking out against the genocide in Gaza. They're saying not in our name. They're saying never again means never again for anyone. Never again is now. And they are indignant and outraged, and their hearts are breaking to see how Israel is perpetuating a genocide against people who had nothing to do with the Holocaust. I mean, these people had no role in the attempted extermination of Jews, and of course, the attempted extermination, we should also mention, of other groups, including, for instance, Roma, which they're never included in the official, Holocaust historiography, of course. But I really think that, every time a Jew speaks out against what Israel's doing, they're making the world safer for Jews, and of course, safer for Palestinians. We need to be speaking out constantly. And what Israel is doing against Palestinians, I guess I feel bad, actually. I always try to focus and center what's happening to Palestinians. And they, of course, are the ultimate and the immediate victims of this. But I guess since you asked me about being Jewish, I do think the irony is, and this is actually the first time that I've felt any self-interest at stake here. In the past, I've always spoken out against what Israel is doing to Palestinians because it's wrong, it's unethical, because I want to show that, they can't hide behind Jews as human shields. They can't weaponize and trivialize anti-Semitism to enact their genocide. But this is the first time I have to say that I actually feel like it's a question of safety for Jews. Like it's not only the right thing, but we have to show the world that we don't support this genocidal campaign because we can't afford to be seen as complicit in it. And that's what's so dangerous about Zionism. And, it's a scary thing when people conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. It's an obvious way to smear people who care about Palestinian human rights, but it's also an anti-Semitic thing, right? It taps into the dual loyalty trope, which is that Jews are all a monolith and we're actually more loyal to Israel than we are to the countries in which we live. And what's also interesting is that there are two groups of people who like to conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which basically equates being Jewish with being Zionist. Those people are like raging anti-Semites, right? Who use the word Zionist and Jewish interchangeably, right? The Zionist this, the Jewish this, the Zionist plot, the Jewish plot. And then the other group is Israel supporters and the government of Israel and the ADL and AIPAC. And all these people are happy to sacrifice the safety of Jews for their genocidal political project. And you can see that in how they treat Israeli Jews as well. Look at how they don't negotiate to release hostages. Look at how they killed their own on October 7th, how there was a mass Hannibal. And of course, the Western media is so complicit in this genocide that if you bring up the Hannibal Directive, which of course is the directive to kill soldiers or kill hostages in order to prevent being forced to, God forbid, negotiate with Hamas, if you bring that up, you're calling a conspiracy theorist. But just look at mainstream Israeli media. I'm not even talking about, the more progressive Haaretz. You look at any mainstream to right-wing Israeli media, and they speak with an honesty about the Hannibal Directive that the Western media doesn't. And another thing I really want to bring up is that something that the Western media is so complicit in is the whitewashing of rape and sexual abuse. And it is so shameful. I mean, we hear people like Dana Bash and Jake Tapper talk about the debunked mass rape that was committed, systemic mass rape that was committed on October 7th. And we know there actually was not any systemic mass rape committed on October 7th. But it would be one thing if they talked about that and at the same time acknowledged the documented rape of Palestinians. But the fact that they don't even pretend to care about that, they don't talk about the fact that we know, and again, you can just go to mainstream and right-wing Israeli media, they don't deny it. We know that Palestinians were sexually abused, were raped, were sodomized. And we know not only that, but when Israeli police tried to arrest some of these rapist soldiers, how did the Israelis react? They protested, not against rape. They protested against the attempt to hold rapists to account, the attempt to actually punish rapists. And then what happened next? As if that's not atrocious enough, you actually have a member of the Knesset saying out loud that it is legitimate, and I'm quoting legitimate, to insert sticks into people's rectums. And as if that's not enough, then you had a rabbi bless one of the rapists, and then you had another rapist become like a pop star on TV shows. And then we just learned that this doctor was raped to death. And all of these crimes against humanity and these crimes of sexual violence and the silence about it just shows you the absolute rank hypocrisy that every single person who brings up the mass rape committed on October 7th, and there was no mass rape committed on October 7th, anyone who brings that up and ignores the documented rape is not only, racist, anti-Palestinian. They are actual monsters, and they don't care about people not only being raped, but as we know, there is one doctor, Adnan al-Bursh, a selfless doctor who refused to leave his hospital, stayed with patients, and he was raped to death.
Raped to death. We do live in the time of monsters, but thankfully we have angels on the earth like you, Katie Halper. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Very moving, powerful interview that I felt. Let me take a quick break. Then it's TJ in Las Vegas on Palestine. I told you, it's the Global University of the Airwaves. Stay tuned.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Now, will Trump end the Ukraine war? That's the poll this evening. 24,884 people have voted. I insist that that gets to 25,000. Will Trump end the Ukraine war? Yes or no? Vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Let's go to Las Vegas. Who wouldn't in this cold weather, where TJ wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, TJ.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. It's a pleasure to be on the show and honor to be on after Katie. I kind of to what she was saying, I wanted to talk a little bit. In 3 days, they're going to pass that anti-Semitism bill, it looks like, that's going to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism in the U.S. And with the people that Trump's appointing to his administration, like Elise Stefanik, who's going to be the ambassador, like she's going to veto every UN resolution as the UN ambassador, or Mike Huckabee, who supports the annexation of the West Bank and will only refer to it as Judea and Samaria, or Pete Hegseth. Every single one of them is a crazy nutcase Zio. And it seems to me like things are going to get a lot worse under him, not only for Palestinians, but for the Americans that want to speak out on behalf of Palestinians, that they're going to start going after us and curtailing our free speech, as is evident with this bill. But I wanted to ask you, because unlike everyone else that I follow in this genre, or, in this movement anyway, you have personal experience with a lot of these world leaders, unlike almost every single other person. The knowledge is firsthand from you, whereas from someone else it's secondhand or thirdhand. And I'm kind of curious, because we're always having these debates on TikTok lives about when we were closest to actually having achieved peace between Israel and Palestine. And I wanted to know from your perspective when that was. Like, was it possibly the Oslo Accords? Having known Arafat and having had the history you had, I'm really curious as to what your perspective is on that, because I feel like I'll get some kind of accurate answer.
No, the easy answer to give you would be the Oslo Accords, but the Oslo Accords were a lie and are in any case dead. And with the bullets that killed Rabin in Dizengoff Square, they were killed stone dead by a supporter of Netanyahu, by the way, who murdered Yitzhak Rabin. So no, it wouldn't be then. I'm going to go really to the edge of the envelope here, TJ, and say it was a couple of weeks ago. It was a couple of weeks ago when the strategic defeat of Israel looked to be a military possibility, when the struggle everywhere was raging, and when Iran was at the heart of an axis of resistance. The truth is, like a surgeon cannot operate on his own foot, think about that. He needs somebody else to operate on his foot, even though he is a surgeon. This will never be resolved if left to Israel. As long as Israel is strong, it has no incentive at all to make what you call peace. Now, moving on to the definition of peace. I'm a strong believer, it's a slogan, but it's true. No justice, no peace. You can get peace in a graveyard, easy. If you kill everybody and anything that can stand up against you, well, you've got a kind of peace until the graves, the people in the graves themselves start to rise up in the form of their children, their grandchildren, and those they have inspired elsewhere in the world. So the peace of the graveyard isn't actually a peace. If there's no justice, there will be no peace, and there will be no justice, and therefore no peace, until Israel is weaker. Not stronger, but weaker. Now, in the last couple of weeks, Israel got very much stronger because the Palestinian resistance got very much weaker. Not their resolve, not their courage, far from it, but their ability meaningfully to resist Israeli domination has very significantly reduced. And so Israel controls the Philadelphia corridor, as you know, where the gate of Rafah is. Beyond it lies the Sinai Desert, which has been helpfully laid out in a number of camping sites that we were told were car parks, parking lots, as you call them. But in effect, they were to accommodate a mass influx of Palestinian refugees from South Gaza. I think that will be the next move. Some people think it will be in the West Bank. Some people think it will be elsewhere. But I believe that in the next 4 weeks, before Trump comes to office, when a brain-dead president is in the White House, the Israelis will open the gate at Rafah, and they will effectively ethnically cleanse 2 million Palestinian refugees who will pour through it into the Egyptian desert. If you think about that, TJ, who's going to stop them? Nobody is going to stop them. The Egyptian state will not, even could not stop them. The Americans are not in the business of stopping Netanyahu doing anything. And if it's going to happen, Trump would rather it didn't happen on his watch. So I think the maximum danger in the next 4 weeks is for the completion of the total ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Now, of course, there are still fighters in Gaza. They are still fighting heroically. They are still taking a significant toll on the occupation that is trying to destroy them. But Israel has the power to do it. And if they have the power to do it, I wouldn't like to be depending on their tender mercies not to actually do it. Thanks for making me think, TJ. If you're watching on TikTok tonight, thanks for the 25,000 likes on the stream so far. You can't donate to us in TikTok because we are apparently categorized as a political program. But remember to follow and share. Comments now. The world is a mess. Only the foolish can't see that all leaders are at the same table, drinking from the same almost empty glass, eating the same murdered carcasses of their own populations. And Island Vibes says the truth of Katie's words, powerful. Zionism is what makes Jewish people unsafe. And Crowhawk says, Trump will do exactly the same as everyone else who's sat in the Oval Office. Exactly what he's told to do. Well, everyone except Jack Kennedy, I know you're going to say, look what happened to him. Ahmad is in North Dakota on Syria. He's up next. Go ahead, Ahmad.
Mr. Galloway, thank you very much for taking my call, and you're absolutely right. I would rather be in Las Vegas with TJ rather than North Dakota in the middle of December, but here we are.
Yeah, you and me both. Me both, Ahmad.
Well, thank you, sir, for taking my call, and I just I wanted to maybe share with you some nuances and insights into the current situation in Syria as to how I understand it from its very, very, very beginning. So I'm originally from the Middle East. My father's from Iraq and my mom's from Egypt. And I was born in Kuwait in 1987. And I remember in 1992, when the Gulf War happened, in 1991, Operation Desert Storm, Canada was looking for engineers, and my parents applied, and we moved to Canada. But I remember my time in Kuwait very, very, very vividly. And the thing is, sir, that I did not meet Palestinians until much, much later in life. So I remember them. I grew up around Palestinians, and my parents, my father especially, and it's his generation, they did not like Palestinians a lot. So they liked them as individuals, as neighbors and things. But when it came to the Palestinian cause and politics, they really, really, really hated it. And they always cited they're fighting amongst themselves, the PLO and Hamas, and they can't even make peace with themselves. Why should we help them? But the thing is that as I got older, I started to see the differences in thinking amongst generations, like from my generation, and from my father's generation. But then now that I see what's happening in Syria, and Palestinians are kind of celebrating the fall, and I understand. I to a degree I understand what's happening. But the thing is that I don't think they realize what is happening, because as your prior guest said, that Zionism and Israel and Judaism, everything is really conflated together. And the thing is that people don't realize that Zionism is a sect of Christianity, and they believe in the rapture, right, for Jesus Christ. And the thing is that, but in order for the rapture to happen, the Jews must die. At least that's how I understand it in the text. And so they're really, if you think about it, their policies are leading to the self-destruction of the Jewish faith and the people. Because believe me, like these differences did not happen at all. There was no such thing as anti-Semitism or Israel this or Israel that. It was always sort of Palestinians. They basically. Oh, and one thing, sir, my grandfather fought in the 1948 war. He was part of the Iraqi troops that were sent to fight Israel, and he remember telling my father stories about how the Palestinian army who were supposed to be working with the Iraqis were actually spying on them and giving their positions to Israelis. And this is what made sort of Arabs dislike working with Palestinians. And I think that for the Palestinian issue to resolve itself, I think the the PLO has to be moved out of the way, because as Martin Luther King says, you have your house slaves, for lack of a better term, and you have your field slaves. And in order for them, and this is how you do it, how you sow division amongst them. And for Israel to remain powerful. And because right now, sir, as we're speaking, there's actually a mini civil war in the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank, and it's between the Palestinian the Mahmoud Abbas's faction and the resistance fighters in that camp. And it's actually very saddening, because you see what's happening in Gaza, and they're fighting with each other. And that's sort of the thing. And I wanted to get your insights, sir.
Yeah, that's a very long litany of issues that you raise, Ahmad. And given the hour, I won't be able to do them all justice, though all were interesting and all reflect in some part or other my own experience. But you have to look deeper to find the actual truth. There are many people in the Gulf who would like to avoid feeling guilty about their complete failure to effectively aid the liberation of Palestine, to murder the king, Faisal, who was the only Arab king in the Persian Gulf who ever did anything meaningful to help liberate Palestine. King Faisal quadrupled the oil price, punished the Western allies of Israel for their further occupation of Arab land in the 1973 war. But other than King Faisal, who was then, of course, murdered directly as a result of what he had done, none of the ruling circles in the Gulf ever did anything for the Palestinians. They grew rich and very fat, and they preferred the treasures of this life, this dunya, to any religious obligation that they might otherwise have felt to help Palestine be recovered from the new crusaders. So there's that at work, I'm sorry to tell you, in your father's stories that he told you. As to the brave Iraqi army, which came to the aid of the Palestinians in 1948, like all of these Arab armies, they were betrayed by their rulers, not by the Palestinians on the ground, who fought valiantly then in 1948 and are still fighting valiantly now. The regimes who sent the armies no longer are. The kings of Arabia included Iraq and Jordan then, and in Jordan's case still now, have done nothing to help the Palestinians recover their country, but everything to do, in the case of Jordan, with protecting Israel. And the same is true of the non-royal frontline state of Egypt. And the same will be true, one can infer, of the now neutral country of Syria, the other frontline state. So there's some shred of truth in everything that you have said, but very far from the whole truth. Let me focus for a minute or two, it's all I have, on what's happening in Jenin. I mentioned that Joe Biden was brain dead. Mahmoud Abbas is brain dead. He must be. He was not exactly fully functioning when I last saw him 20 years or more ago. So 20 years on, and all the dinners he's eaten since then, he's definitely not the sharpest tool in the box. His authority, so-called, has only one purpose, and that purpose is to stop any emerging security threats to the Israeli occupation. It has no other function at all. It has some good ambassadors, the one in London, for example, Mr. Zumlot, is no friend of mine, but he does a very good job. But the authority that they serve would kill every person in Jenin, if they had to protect Netanyahu and Israel, because that protects their obscene wealth and abuse of power, which they have infamously exercised now over several decades. So if the PLO, as you say, is no longer fit for purpose, I would say otherwise. I would say that the PLO must be reconstituted. It must be revolutionized. It needs a new leader. That new leader has to be Marwan Barghouti, who is neither Hamas nor Abbas, who stands above and beyond these squabbling Palestinian factions. And by the way, in the times that you mentioned, when the PLO was fighting people, it was not actually fighting Hamas. Hamas didn't exist then. I was there at the birth of Hamas. But in the 1970s and early 80s, I was frequently in Lebanon, and there was gunfire all night in the camps, and that fighting was between the mainstream PLO and the hirelings of the various Arab regimes. The Sa'iqa was the Syrian regime's puppet force, and a peculiarly murderous one, as I recall. The Iraqis had a client army, and others. The Rafid, they were called, the Rejection Front. They rejected Arafat's line of seeking a negotiated settlement with the occupation and the process which ultimately led ignominiously to the death and defeat of the Oslo process. So thanks for taking me down memory lane. I was there personally. There's nothing that anybody knows about the Palestinian case that I don't know. And I always like to make that point. I didn't come up the Jordan River yesterday. I came up it 50 years ago. Ahmed in North Dakota, as cold as it is here in the United Kingdom, I'm sure the poll has crossed 25,000 votes, well past it. And I'll give you the result. But before that, take a look at how you can appear on my other show, Have It Out with Galloway. Watch this. Join me every week to Have It Out with Galloway. We discuss the great issues of the day and occasionally the odd philosophical meandering through the meaning of life. You can be on the show by contacting us at our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can be the star of the show. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You need to watch Have It Out with Galloway. The great Danny Haifong. I haven't spoken to him for quite some time. He's on the show with me. Goes out on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. But why don't you come on the show in person, on the video wall? Well, you can do so by writing to me at haveitoutwithgalloway.com. It's that time of the night that I look forward to, and I know so do many of you. It's Gayatri's social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, this week I share your pride in your Irishness, in our children's bloods, in our children's Irish bloods. I'm very proud of. It's been Ireland's clear and consistent position and action that has led to Israel withdrawing their embassy, which is quite astonishing.
It is.
And one of their TDs, I think Simon Harris, made a speech, you know, a bit of black and white. And he said one line very, very important. He said, I believe in freedom of speech. People are entitled to articulate their views, but they're not entitled to have an alternative set of facts. And the set of facts are very clear for everyone to see. We all just have to open our phone, and we've seen it in the past 14 months. It's day 438 of the Gaza genocide, and according to Save the Children UK, it is the deadliest place on earth to be a child. Imagine.
No, for sure. How could
and
it be otherwise?
96% of the children in Gaza, they feel that death is imminent. What kind of childhood is that to grow up in? And obviously,
many of them want to be dead.
They want to be dead because they want to be reunited with their loved ones who have already been killed by Israel. And obviously, this week was the killing of the most favorite grandfather on earth, Sheikh Khaled Naban, who we dedicate today's show to. His killing was particularly heartfelt to all the people in the world because of his appearance, the assumed juxtaposition of his appearance that have a certain association, but is placed with the fact that he is so so loving, obviously loving, and he even when they killed him and they carried him away, he had a smile on his face. He was smiling in death. This is the icon that Israel killed. So
they did it deliberately. They killed him because he was beloved. They did it because he was an icon.
Yeah.
And he probably won't be the last icon to be killed. Everyone beware of that. This man's death day should be renamed World Grandfather Day. People should remember, I think it was the 15th or 16th of December, his death day should now become the World Grandfather Day. Let's let MOATS be the first to call for that.
16th of December.
Let's have that go around the world. Let's never forget the saintly grandfather, Sheikh Khaled Naban.
So last week you made a statement that on the back of President Bashar al-Assad being ousted, you have given up on the Arab cause. This caused a lot of havoc.
Kerfuffle.
Yes, to say the least. But you did receive a lot of support, messages saying, we know what you mean, and you know we still support you. We get loads of them, and I just want to read out one of them. Seth Al-Siouf. He says, I'm an Arab American living in Pennsylvania. I'm a big fan of your show and an old supporter and a follower of your Arab and Muslim support cause conferences and lectures. I just felt a little down when I heard you saying that the Arab cause is dead now. And I felt that you just gave up on us in this brutal, unfair, unjust world we live in. He's been corrected. It's been corrected since. Of course, George meant the slave Arabs, the how did you?
And the extremist. Look, you can do what you like. You can be a slave if you like. You can be a Takfiri extremist if you like. But don't ask me to go along with it. Don't ask me to spend what limited time and effort I've got on this earth to help you with these two pastimes, because none of them have anything to do with me. I'm against the slave Arab rulers and their collaborators. They're useful idiots. And I'm against the extremist fanatics that cut people's heads off. I will never, ever support ISIS and Al-Qaeda or the alphabet soup of people who think and act like them. So that's all I was saying. I've got limited time. There are many other things in the world that I can be doing. I can be talking and working about Africa, about Asia. I can be talking about Russia, about Eurasia. I could be going to my children's sports days and my children's Christmas parties. And so that's all I'm saying. You know, you don't own me, and I don't ask you for any thanks for anything that I did, and I never have. You don't owe me anything. At the same time, you don't own me. And if I conclude that meaningfully nothing good is going to happen in the Arab world in the remainder of my lifetime, that's my right to conclude that. And maybe it's your challenge to prove me wrong. Why not look at it that way? Make it a challenge to you to prove me wrong. If you do, I will have made the wrong judgment. If you don't, I'll have made the right judgment. Sorry for that rant.
I guess what we're saying here, and what I have said in my video, is that if you find yourself on the same side of a dancing, cheering Netanyahu claiming something that happened as his victory, I want you to think again. This is Gary Hill. He says, what a fabulous monologue you delivered today. By pure chance, I was looking at a map of the Middle East to better understand the present ongoing situation. Furthermore, I looked for Bethlehem and wondered if this sacred place is immune from violence. You succinctly answered my question earlier. So thank you for that, and Merry Christmas. God bless you.
Was I too harsh on the church? Why do they never tell the children what's actually happening in Bethlehem now?
No, you're not too harsh. You're not too harsh.
We went to a midnight mass.
Yeah, we do.
Christmas Eve.
We do.
And Not a single word about what was happening in Palestine was uttered, even though the Holy Family were there, depicted in Bethlehem. How is the cognitive dissonance there? You're talking about Bethlehem. You're talking about a family from Nazareth. You're talking about a baby that grew up and was murdered in Jerusalem. But you don't actually mention a word of those that are being murdered in those very places today. It just seems like you're treating religion as if it's a fossil, as if it's a piece in a museum.
Yeah, that's right. Or not wanting to open the Pandora box of lots of questions from the congregation and the children.
What would Jesus have done? That's what I always ask myself. I ask myself that every day in my life.
Well, there used to be a wristband saying, "What would Jesus do?"
Yeah.
WJWD.
Yeah.
Very quickly to the poll, will Trump end the Ukraine war? Well, funny enough, obviously Zelensky is not invited to Trump's inauguration.
That is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And at the same time, Trump actually announced that China and the US can solve all the problems of the world. And he's patting Xi Jinping as a really amazing person. So it's very interesting.
I hope he means that.
Exactly,
that would definitely change the whole world, Donald. If you really mean that, we can retire. Because yes, the United States and China could solve all the problems in the world. Get down to it, lads.
Yes. But the poll is showing 50-50. It's very interesting. People just don't know, because the fact is that we don't know what Trump will Donald Trump is going to act upon it. So Ali A says Trump will do whatever is more profitable for him. The Biden crime family will remove their snouts out of Ukraine to make way for Trump's snouts. Same shizzle, different person. And Matthew Parker says, imagine being 5-0 up at the 18-minute mark of a football match, and your opponent wants to quit then and call it a draw. That's how completely insane, deluded, and full of hubris the West is. Trump will need a good grip on reality if he wants to negotiate peace in Ukraine. And then finally, Nino Legend says, it will be tricky with Trump. He will not run again, so he has nothing to lose. So hopefully his ego kicks in and he wants to be remembered as a great president.
I hope so. I mean, we can only pray for that Donald Trump to turn up. But the early signs are not good, I think. Although he comes along with that statement about China, and suddenly you've got some hope, some optimism again.
50-50.
Well, we'll see very soon. He'll be along in a minute, 4 weeks or so from now. He'll be the president, and he doesn't need to please anybody. He doesn't have to satisfy any vested interest. He doesn't have to do what his donors expect him to do. He'll never be running for office again. That's a very strong position to be in, and I really hope that he takes advantage of it. We here in Britain, of course, have a government which is literally making war against pensioners, old age pensioners, having taken the cold weather allowance away from them. The WASPy women, the women born between 1950 and 1960, who were forced to work an extra 5 years before they got their pension, were robbed of £31 billion thereby, were betrayed yesterday, by the so-called Labour government, which ran for office on July the 4th, promising that it would give justice to these millions of women. I was one of the first members of Parliament to join their campaign.
Yep, you
and
were.
I'm not going to leave it. We demand justice for Britain's elderly, who are, I mentioned several times how cold it is. Trust me, they're cold tonight. Now, hundreds of calls tonight. I'm sorry we didn't get through to any but a mere fraction of those, but 2 quick calls before we close. Imran is in North Carolina on Syria. Go ahead, Imran.
Hey, George. Thank you for taking my call. I'm an American born and raised. My family background is from Syria. Both my parents were born there. I just wanted to quickly address some of the things and people like you have said, which is, I would say, it's actually nonsense and a bunch of lies. Like you're calling the people who have taken over Syria now and running Syria now like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is absolutely not true. And you're labeling them as terrorists backed by the CIA with no evidence of that at all. And the other claims you have made about the authorities in Syria, like just oppressing minorities, you sound exactly like how a Zionist talks about Palestinians. Oh, these Muslims are doing this, they're doing that, No, this is absolutely nonsense. How can you be pro-Palestinian, but you're not like pro the Syrian people, which is what this HCS group consists of, ordinary Syrians who have been oppressed by the Assad regime for decades. So I wanted to confront you about that.
Stay on the line. I hope you've got the guts. I hope you've got the guts to stay on the line. The U.S. government is offering a $10 million reward for anyone who can lead them to the arrest of the leader of HTS, Al-Golani. True or false?
Yeah, we don't care about that. We don't care about that. You guys call anyone, any group that emerges from the Middle East.
The American authorities will be delighted to hear it. They're not going to lift the reward. Donald Trump has just this evening, said that he will not be lifting that reward. So there's $10 million for the arrest of the man that you are on this show glorifying. Are you sure you want to do that, Imran? Or is the American government wrong to consider him the former deputy leader of ISIS, the former deputy leader of Al-Qaeda? Are the American government wrong to consider him as a terrorist?
Yes, they are wrong, because we don't care what they think, okay? He is not a terrorist, and nobody gives a damn what you
what do you mean you don't care
have
what
to say
they
about
say?
Muslims in the Middle East. It's none of your business, man. They
Filthy
can run Syria
kafirs.
however they want.
Filthy. You just called who filthy kafirs? Who was that you were
like you.
describing as filthy kafirs? The American government.
You and people like you. Yes, 'cause that's what they are.
Me and
Evil.
people like me and the American government.
Yes.
Well, that's a very interesting call, Imran, in North Carolina. That is a very interesting call indeed. But as I'm a filthy kafir, you won't want to detain me in your space any longer. But if I was you, I'd be moving out of North Carolina pretty rapido. Norma in Bristol is on the line about Syria. The legend is back. Norma, what would you like to say?
Hello, George. We shan't have an argument because I think there's enough of that going on. No, a long time, it's just a little snippet, really, for the end of the show. A long time ago, at a friend's hotel in Bournemouth, I met this young Syrian scholar, and his name was Ratib al-Shala, and he was studying at Oxford University at PPE, and eventually he became the president of the Damascus Chamber of Commerce, and he died about a month ago, aged 92. He was quite famous. He died in Lebanon, actually. But why I mention him, because he was absolutely fascinating. He was a clever man, and I'll never forget him. So I thought I'd just tell you that.
Well, I'm glad that you did. Syria has produced some of the greatest artists, some of the greatest writers, some of the greatest philosophers and jurists. Syria is the place where the great treasures of Palmyra and Malula at least for the moment, exist, although ISIS and Al-Qaeda destroyed Palmyra and its priceless treasures. Much of it was rebuilt. Much of it was saved by a man called Assad, who was the curator of the ruins of Palmyra. And he refused to tell ISIS and Al-Qaeda where they had buried and stored the most priceless treasures, and they tortured him to death. And he still did not divulge the whereabouts. Some truly great people came from Syria. But there are others, like the one you've just heard, Imran in North Carolina. Should I read out his telephone number? Nah, probably not. There are others who call people who are different to them filthy kafirs. There are others who think that the former ISIS and Al-Qaeda leaders are true patriots and who will create a Syria in their image. All I can say is, God save the Syrian people. It has been an eventful show. We saved the most eventful to last. Thanks very much for being here. If you are tired of the festivities on Wednesday, the show will go on. So after your Christmas dinner, why don't you lie back, pat your tummy, and switch on the mother of all talk shows at 7 p.m. on Christmas night, next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Good night.